When you live a life in tangents, it can be an adventure to try to find the beginning of a story. This one starts when I was 3, with my father lifting me up so he could place my head on top of a sheet of photographic paper. The red light, the smell of fix, the magic, being with my wonderful daddy, I loved everything about it. Flash forward to college, taking earnest photographs inspired by the discovery of Robert Frank's The Americans. From the foreword by Jack Kerouac. Robert Frank, Swiss, unobtrusive, nice. With that little camera that he raises and snaps with one hand, he sucked a sad poem right out of America onto film, taking rank among the tragic poets of the world. Oh yes, that's what I wanted to do too. I was determined to get a summer job working in photography. Someone said, "Call Mickey Pallas. Mickey always has something going on." The man on the left is who I met. The man on the right is who I came to know. Studs Terkel wrote of Mickey, "Always he's been where the action is, on a picket line in the 40s, in a southern town when blacks were no more than dreaming of equality, in raffish joints where the half-world made out in the dark. Mickey, with the gait and the build of a club fighter, was deceptively good. Mickey Pallas, like Kilroy, was there." Studs starred in a local television show called Studs Place, which was kind of like Cheers, only folkier and grittier. Mickey shot the publicity stills. He said he introduced Studs to Edith Piaf, and that together they used to chase down to the South Side on Sunday mornings to hear Mahalia Jackson sing in churches. That's Eartha Kitt in the middle and in Cuba. Mickey opened the first professional lab in Chicago, Gamma, in the early 1960s. My office was in a brownstone next door, now torn down. Shortly before we met, Mickey had a stroke that shredded his memory, but each day, through the alchemy of the darkroom, I traveled back in time and saw his life through his eyes. Chuck Reynolds, Mickey's assistant, said he came to think of him as Chicago's Ouija, a reference to a 1940s-era New York press photographer. Art imitated life a bit when some of Mickey's photos were used in the opening sequence of a movie starring Joe Pesci as a photographer closely modeled on Ouija. Roger Ebert gave it 4 stars. Speaking of Ebert, when he saw Mickey's photograph of Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin from 1951, he said, "The crowd adored them. Then one night after the show at the Chicago Theater, a woman put her hands on Jerry's neck and would not let go. That night," he said, "he learned to scan the eyes of the crowd, looking for the loony birds." Mickey's first clients were labor unions, work that started out as a side gig when he became an organizer at the Studebaker car factory where he worked. Justice, equality, security. That was taken during a sugar packer strike in Louisiana, where desegregation was one of the issues on the table. The police surrounding the striker were known as Chicago's anti-union Red Squad. I was, and am, particularly taken by Mickey's portraits. These are from a series called The Faces of Labor. When Mickey struck it rich in the lab business, Chuck Reynolds told him he'd have to become a Republican. "But I was always a Republican," said Mickey. "I was a Republican for Truman. I was a Republican for Stevenson. What do you want from me?" But Mickey started literally from scratch. He grew up in a Jewish orphanage where he bought his first camera for $1.29 with a couple of other boys. He wanted to go to the Institute of Design, but nobody thought that was practical. So when he married Millie, he tried all kinds of jobs: truck driver, insurance salesman, dry cleaner. But once he figured out how to earn a living taking pictures, that was his passport to everything. For Sepia magazine, a precursor to Ebony, he photographed a story about boxing legend Joe Louis. For an ad agency, he did a series on hula hoopers. He took pictures for the Windy City Softball League. He traveled to Europe working for Abe Saperstein, the legendary impresario of the Harlem Globetrotters. Standard Oil of Indiana was another bread-and-butter client. For Torch magazine, which was modeled after Life magazine, Mickey and a writer invented Standardland, which was basically as far as you could get in a car. The convertible is from a series of ads about Buick owners. We, of course, can see what wasn't so obvious at the time: the sterility of the suburbs, a world innocent of climate change, sexism. For a feature in Chicago Magazine, Joanne Trestrail wrote, "Mickey Pallas pictures were taken before meaning turned back on itself." There is no irony here, but a wide-eyed interest. The baton twirler performed on an amateur hour show, and Mary Hartline? Clearly Chicago's answer to Marilyn Monroe. Every Friday we would go to Club Lago for lunch, where Mickey would flirt with the waitresses. "Didn't we go to different schools together?" he'd ask. At his 75th birthday party in Palm Springs, he sat down next to me and said, "You and me? We're the only ones with our real faces here." Such humor, such heart. Mickey also did a lot of work for burlesque magazines. The photographs that I chose weren't necessarily the same as those used for publication. Marilyn, by the way, is a transvestite, photographed for a story that ran in sepia about a famous South Side ball held on the only day of the year it was legal for a man to dress as a woman in Chicago. The 1960 political conventions were the last major stories Mickey covered as a professional photographer before Gamma took over his life. Again, no irony, but a breathtaking deftness. RFK, LBJ, JFK, Nixon. No one could have imagined what was to come. Before I went back to college, I made a deal with Mickey. I would find and train someone to finish making the contact sheets, thousands of them, in exchange for a photograph. Mickey was an avid collector. Smith, Curtis, Doisneau, Cartier-Bresson. Months later, when I found this photograph by Josef Sudek waiting for me at the lab, I decided to try to curate a retrospective. But I didn't tell Mickey until a venue had been secured. In the meantime, I interviewed everyone from Studs Terkel, Cornell Kappa, and Roger Ebert to his then-dying wife Millie, Chuck Reynolds, members of black churches. Mickey cried when I told him that there would be a show at the Chicago Cultural Center. Then it toured, and we celebrated. A few years ago, after my father died, I began sending my sister and my mother a picture every night. News from the lamppost garden, from the lake, from the viaduct. What began as a way to stay in touch without having to talk became a kind of daily meditation. Not since college, when I wore at least one camera around my neck at all times, now it's an iPhone in my purse, have I felt so connected. Just as for Mickey, photography has been a kind of passport. Things lead to things, and time marches on. Often when I sit at night at the kitchen table stitching together a picture in my digital darkroom, which is woefully bereft of red light and fix, I think of the doors that opened because of, and I feel blessed.